Hi, okay, so welcome to week 2. This is lecture A. I'm going to be going over our 3 articles for the library research assignment. My goal with this lecture is to give you the basic understanding to make sure to give you another resource for understanding the basic argument of each of these authors. I'm going to try to highlight their premises and conclusions in such a way that will make it easier for you to begin to engage with them critically. And so remember, if you disagree with any of these authors at all, then there's either going to be a premise that you disagree with, or they will have used logic in a way that is illegitimate. And this isn't just for if you if you wholly disagree. I'm sorry. What I mean to say also is that even if you kind of disagree, right? If you're like, well, I like everything Miller said except when he got to refugees. Well, okay, then there's going to be a premise about refugees or some logical inference about in the refugee section that you will have an issue with. Okay? So one thing that I will not accept when you write essays to me is if you say, the author made strong points, but ultimately I disagree, and maybe just because I don't see it that way, or because I don't feel that's right. Well, that's not enough. That's telling me you have an opinion for sure, but that's not giving me any justification for your opinion. And as far as critical thinking goes, that's not good enough. So we're going to start with Miller, and then I'm going to go to Singer, and then we're going to do Van Parijs and Vanderborg on basic income. Okay. But before I do, the one thing I do want to point out here is this. I just want to let you guys know, these are your groups here. Economic redistribution only had 8 people, so y'all are in the same group. And then I split up the rest according to 6 or 7 people. And these are the groups that you're going to be responsible to for the rest of the course, okay? So with regard to your homework, I ask you to make a post on one of those forums. So here it is, number 8 and number 9. Make a thread or respond to one that's already made in your group where everyone can list their available times during week 4. In week 4, I will ask you to hold roughly a half-hour meeting to discuss the author's claim. So in week 4 is the week in which you will be beginning and finishing your rough draft, because the library research assignment is due at the end of week 5. So that's a chance for you to run through the arguments and to discuss any more issues that you might be having, and just to have a discussion about the issue that interests you. If there's anything that I haven't talked about, or that your classmates haven't talked about that's still kind of bugging you, that's what you'll talk about then in week 4. So because everyone is kind of scattered across the globe, you need to agree on a time with your group, a half an hour, when you can all meet. So go ahead and log into iLearn and click on whichever group belongs to you. So for instance, Animal Groups, Ethics A. I've got the group members listed here. I also sent out an email with a master list of all the groups. I haven't limited you to, so you can view any other group's discussion, and technically you can add to their discussion as well. But I will be checking just to make sure. All right, Taryn Howard. Taryn, have you been, commenting in this forum? Well, not yet, but hopefully you will have, right? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. You need to agree on a time. So someone from this group, one of these 7 people, is going to need to add a new discussion topic right here, and everyone is going to need to let everyone else know what times they are available during the week that they can commit to in week 4, and then you'll have to agree. And in week 3, I'll ask you to agree as one of your homework assignments, and I'll ask you to send me an email and let me know. Okay? And I will try my best to also be available for that group discussion. Alright, and then the other thing I want to point out for the week 2 homework set is this number 9 here. Make a thread or respond to a thread already made in your group in which you discuss this week's article. You may discuss the questions about the article or points from the article that you found interesting. You must post at least twice. So if you make a thread, that'll count as one post. But one thing that is incredibly valuable about regular classes that I am still very suspicious about regarding online classes is the class participation and the value of having other people's thoughts and idea and hearing a discussion in front of you. So I can lay out the arguments flat. I can say, look, Singer does A, B, C. He concludes D. That's not going to give you at least a rich understanding like you would get if you even just sat in a room and listened to people have a discussion about it. And that's not something that, at least right now, I know how to reproduce with these videos. So that's what we're trying to get at. And I do think that's an important part of any class environment. So that is going to be necessary for your success. And then just don't forget, I'm asking you to continue your argument journal. We've talked about premises and conclusions from last week. So that's what I'm really looking for you to have, is to at least try to identify premises and conclusions. And of course, as we will learn this week, not all of those premises and conclusions will be stated explicitly. So you're going to have to do some, I don't know if detective work is the right words, but you're going to have to do some inference to sometimes figure out the premises, and that's good. And again, I guess one thing I'll point out also is that this should be more or less casual stuff. If you go out and find an article, great, that's cool, but you're doing too much work, or at least more work than I require you to do. So my hope is that you will just see that people use arguments casually on social media, on news programs, in newspaper reports, and anything, and that usually they're not giving you a full, complete, great argument. So that's just something I want us to be aware of, is that arguments are used in casual settings too. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the material. This is going to be a longer lecture since I've got 3 bits of material to get through. But I'm going to try to keep it to about 15 minutes per. We're already up to almost 10. Jeez. Okay, so Miller, the case for limits. One thing I like about Miller is that he has already told us what his conclusion is just in his title. That's great. Do the same thing in your own writing. It makes it super clear. The case for limits. So there was actually another colon. Immigration, the case for limits. And that tells me exactly what he's arguing. He's going to be arguing that there are limits to appropriate immigration. So, great. Let's hear that. All right. So I think Miller does an excellent job in explaining the issue and summarizing his argument in the first few sentences and in the first paragraph. So let's take a quick look at that. Okay, so this is Miller's Immigration, the Case for Limits. I like him giving us some context here, telling us that talking about immigration is not easy from a philosophical perspective, especially if you're writing in a society in which immigration has become a highly charged issue. So he's acknowledging, right, that people are coming to this issue with a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different preconceptions, and he's going to try to shed some light, or at least make some progress within that. So, is it possible both to argue that every member of the political community, native or immigrant, must be treated as a full citizen, enjoying equal status and equal respect, and to argue that there are good grounds for setting upper bounds both to the rate and overall numbers of immigrants who are admitted? Yes, but it requires dexterity. So he's giving you some context here. He understands himself to be bridging a gap between liberal and conservative general viewpoints regarding immigration. So that's what he's at least going to try to do. So I really do like Miller's writing here for that reason. Okay? So I shall explain why nation-states may be justified in imposing restrictive immigration policies if they so choose. That's his conclusion right there. I'll explain why nation-states may be justified in imposing restrictive immigration policy if they choose. Okay? And then he's going to lay out the argument in 3 places. Look at that! In the first page, we already know the conclusion. And he's already told us the basic outline for his argument. Okay? So that's what I've got here. His conclusion, nation-states can justify restrictive immigration controls. He has 3 basic ideas. Technically, these may not be premises, but just for clarity's sake, I'm putting these up like as if they are. So, in general, he's going to say that positive arguments in favor of a right to migrate fail. So some philosophers argue that we have, as a human right, the right to move freely, basically anywhere we want. And Miller's going to say those arguments don't work. He's going to say culture and population are at least 2 reasons why it's okay to control immigration. And 3, states cannot refuse refugees for reasons that do not apply to general migrants. So what that means is he's going to change what he says about refugees. But he's going to say that that's because refugees are a special situation. Okay? So, what this means is, if you are of the opinion that migration should be open for all, you're going to have to probably disagree with premise 2 or premise 1. So pay attention to those arguments. If you are of the opinion that a state can restrict migration in any course, any event, any case, to any extent, then you are probably going to disagree with premise 3, right? Miller does not think that states can refuse refugees, or at least he doesn't think that we don't have some duty. He does think that we have a duty to refugees. And as he said here, his restrictions are upper bounds to the rate and overall numbers. What he's not talking about, and we'll see this as we get into it, he's not talking about setting a ban on immigration in general. He's talking about setting some limits, some restrictions of flow and control. So these are nuances which you need to pay attention to. So again, if you disagree with those in any way to any extent, there's going to be a reason why, so look out for that. Alright, well, let's get into it. So why do arguments for freedom of movement fail? Well, Miller distinguishes between basic freedom and bare freedom. And if you've already watched or read about definitions, you'll see that what he's doing here is giving a stipulative definition. Basic freedom, he stipulates as being a freedom that a person must have for flourishing. That's my paraphrasing. A bare freedom is a freedom that does not warrant protection. It's called bare because it's unprotected, right? So now I'm going to give an ostensive definition. I'm going to give you an example. So a basic freedom is probably something like education. We generally believe that all human beings, because they are human beings, have some right to reasonable education. So we would think that's a basic freedom. That's something everyone should have. Bare freedom, Miller's example is the freedom to drive a Aston Martin. He might have that freedom, but it's not really a protected freedom. It's not necessary for his flourishing that he be able to drive an Aston Martin. Okay? So what about movement? Well, he acknowledges that some movement is necessary. It's necessary as a basic freedom. So why might that be? Why is some movement necessary for flourishing? Well, You need to be able to find a job. You need to be able to go to the hospital. You need to be able to visit your family members. So some movement is necessary. If you're stuck in the same city all your life, then and a famine occurs, or the industry leaves your city, you might be in dire straits. You need the ability to travel to another city to look for better job opportunities, or to pursue your dreams, etc. Okay. So some movement is necessary. But Miller's general position is that on a global scale, global movement is not necessary for human flourishing. I, as a citizen of the United States and a current resident of San Francisco, do not need, this is Miller's view, do not need the freedom to travel to Madagascar in order to live a flourishing life. So that's it. That's his reason for thinking that movement is not a basic freedom. Some people will argue that because a right to exit your country is a basic right, and that's for political protection. So I need the right to leave the United States because otherwise the United States might exploit me and I have no other recourse. So some people will say that that right requires us to have the ability to enter into another country. Miller says no, because it's similar to marriage in this case. For him, that right only exists if there is another country willing to accept you. Some people argue that freedom of movement is necessary because not having movement entrenches global inequality, and that's pretty. There is a lot of global inequality. A lot of the wealth and resources of this globe are concentrated in the hemispheric north and in the west as well. And some might think that freedom of movement is an important tool for redistributing that equality in a more egalitarian way. But actually some research has shown that that's not the case, because generally the poorest people are not the people who have the ability to travel, and also the people who do have the ability to travel are the rich and wealthy already, are the people that might be needed by the home country. So if you're coming from an undeveloped country and you're a doctor, the people in that undeveloped country need you there as a doctor, right? And if that person leaves, then the people in the home country are kind of left out to dry, so to speak. So that's his argument there. Okay, so here is his basic argument for justifying some limits to immigration. First, regarding culture. So here I define I give us a three-premise argument for why culture is a good reason for limiting immigration. So premise one, it's important for a community to self-determine their public political culture. Premise two, immigrants will have differing values that will transform the public culture. Premise three, controlling public culture entails controlling flow of immigration. Therefore, it's important for a community to control immigration. So Miller qualifies this. He's not going to say that you have a right that your culture stays the exact same. That's impossible. He acknowledges that. So that's why he doesn't endorse a blanket stoppage of immigration. That would be unreasonable. But some migration, because some migration is not going to significantly alter public culture. So you couldn't give this culture argument to deny a single person. For instance, suppose there's only one person who wants to get into your country and you say, well, you don't really share my cultural values, I'm not going to let you in. This argument would not justify preventing that person from coming in, because that person coming in is not going to change the public culture of your home country. Further, and this is my point, this argument here doesn't really justify restriction of migrants with similar political values. So this doesn't really give us a good reason for restricting someone from entering the country if they are a liberal Democrat. And again, that's, liberal Democrat. I'm using specifically to refer to the general liberal West that believes in, equality of human beings and no coercion of the government unless it's justified to the coerced, and Democrat in the sense that, we like voting, that sort of thing, is an important thing to manage for a country, because obviously if your population gets too high, then you have too many people weighing on your resources. Maybe you lose the ability to take care of your country as much as you would like to. So here I've got a quote from him. A viable population policy at a global level requires that each state be responsible for stabilizing or even possibly reducing its population over time. And this is going to be impossible to achieve if there are no restrictions on movement of people between states. So the idea is, if you've got a country A that is managing its population, country B which is not, then people will migrate from country B into country A, and you won't have a stable global migration policy. Okay, so that's all right, but here's one thing I do want to point out, is whether or not this puts the burden in the right place on the right people. It seems to me that the people who have failed in this case, a state with no good population policy, that's not the fault of an individual, that's the fault of a government. And it doesn't seem right to me to restrict the freedoms of an individual because of actions taken by the government itself. So in this case, I would agree with his premises, but I would say that his logical inference is flawed. It seems to me he's right. We need a stable globalization policy, but that doesn't justify restricting the freedoms of individuals, since it's not the fault of individuals. A single individual cannot cause overpopulation. It's the fault of governments that are not taking better care of their country, of their infrastructure, of their education. And so it seems that we are unjustly punishing potential migrants. All right, so this is the last thing we've got here, refugees. So Miller does recognize the duty to help refugees. Refugees, let's just give a general definition. This is not going to be super clear, but just so we know what we're talking about, we're going to say that refugees are people that lack political protection, that people whose government is unable to protect them. So a government at war, it may not be able to protect them, unable or unwilling. So if you're also an ethnic minority and your government is engaging in genocide against you, you have no protection from your government. You're a refugee. And without going into this, in general, people arguing from the Western liberal tradition do recognize that everyone has a basic human right to government protection. So that's why Miller recognizes a duty to refugees. However, he makes some qualifications. One, that duty does not imply long-term migration. If we could temporarily shelter a refugee for a few months, let's say, and solve the problem in their home country, then we could reasonably ask that refugee to return. Number two, the duty doesn't have to be discharged through migration. We can discharge it through intervention. So if the problem is that your government is being corrupt, we could intervene and fix your government, so to speak. That's another way to discharge. Three, this duty does not imply global migration. There are many reasons why a refugee should be taken in by country X instead of country Y. So what I mean by that is that if you're a refugee in America, let's say something happens and now many Americans are becoming refugees, we may have right to migrate to a nearby country, Canada or Mexico, but that doesn't necessarily give us the right to migrate anywhere, right? Where we migrate is largely a product of the best fit for us in the countries that will take us in, are willing to take us in. So these are valid. I take them to be valid arguments, but I would just qualify the conclusion that, for instance, the duty can be discharged through intervention. That's true. But if we're having an honest discussion, I would also want to point out that intervention is messy and dangerous, and it might be easier and cause less harm to engage in a migration policy than through an intervention policy. But that's good. That's good. So then we've actually gained some understanding now. We know that intervention is a possibility, and that it's not off the table, but that it is messy, and we need to be reasonably sure that intervention is a less harmful policy to take than migration. Okay. And then here's the last issue. So he has, here's a slight concern, whether or not we're going to discriminate. So here's a premise, here's an argument for why a country can select among its migrants. So, premise 1, states have the right to put a cap on the total number of migrants per year. Now we know this already from our population argument. States are going to need the ability to limit the flow of migrants per year. So that means that, premise 2, states will have to choose between migrants. Premise 3, some migrants are a better fit for any given country than other migrants. You might say, if you speak English, you have a better chance of succeeding in America than if you don't. If you speak Japanese, you'll have a better chance of succeeding in Japan than you would of succeeding in the US. Conclusion, some migrants will be better choices for a country than others. So what this argument is getting us is that a country does have legitimate better choices when it comes to selecting which migrants get in and which migrants don't. So Miller thinks it's reasonable to select based on religion, or sorry, not religion, excuse me, that's one of the ones where we don't select on. It's reasonable to select based on education, perhaps, political values, what language you speak, and maybe whether or not your culture is similar to the culture that you're heading into. But Miller qualifies that it's unreasonable to discriminate based on race, sex, or religion in most cases. He says those aren't valid grounds for discrimination. The question I would want to ask in return is, on what grounds can we say that it's not valid to discriminate based on race, sex, or religion? So you may know or may not know that the state, Australia, I think it was in the 1950s or earlier, I don't quite recall, but I do know that Australia attempted to institute a White Australia policy where they attempted to restrict migration only to Caucasians. Now Miller would find that disgusting, but I'm not sure on what grounds Miller can say that that's wrong. If the Australians at that time thought that being white was a reflection of their political culture or their general culture, then it seems like Miller's argument would justify their essentially racist discrimination. And the U.S. has had similar policies throughout its history. We've had quotas on how many immigrants we allow from China and Asian countries year to year, and especially earlier in the 1800s, we've stopped migration from Asiatic countries. And if we can attempt to justify that on, quote, cultural grounds, unquote, it seems like it fits through Miller's argument. So that's me just pointing out that I take there to be another issue here. I'm not sure that this is a good argument because premise 1, 2, and 3 would seem to allow for discrimination based on race, sex, and religion. And we think that it's absolutely wrong to discriminate based on race, sex, and religion. So one of these premises has got to be wrong. But okay, those are my thoughts. You can continue it from here. I'm not trying to tell you that Miller is a bad argument. I certainly would not have presented it to you if I thought that it was a worthless argument. But I think it's a very interesting argument to look at and provocative, and a good example for me to point out, at least in a few cases, where I think he's messed up. So go ahead and think about that for yourself. Do you agree with my criticisms? Do you not? All right, let's move on to the next one. Peter Singer. All animals are equal. So Singer gives us this example here. Mary Wollstonecraft published Vindication of Rights of Women, 1792, and a philosopher at that time published in response a Vindication of the Rights of Brutes. That philosopher, Thomas Taylor, argued that if we're going to give rights to women, even though at the time they had this idea that women were less intellectually capable, if we were going to give them rights despite that difference, why don't we go ahead and give rights to animals also? But we have some vindication here, because Singer's argument is essentially going to be to show, yeah, actually that's true. Intellect doesn't matter. We should give people moral rights and respect and recognition, not based on how smart they are, but simply based on whether or not they can be harmed. Okay. So, let's go ahead and start this. Are we able to draw a line between humans and animals? Singer's going to say no, but one thing you might say is to say that, well, animals are fundamentally different in some respect, right? So, for instance, an animal can't vote. So an animal shouldn't have a right to vote. Well, that's okay, yeah, sure. But that only gets us so far. It only gets us as far as the right to vote goes. So for here example, we have two different rights that aren't held by all beings, all persons. Regarding abortion, can men have an abortion? No. So men cannot have a right to an abortion. But this doesn't stop us from thinking that men and women have equal rights. Similarly then, can dogs vote? No, so dogs cannot have a right to vote. But similarly, that doesn't have to stop us from thinking that animals have, quote, equal rights, unquote. Now we need to go ahead and make one thing clear. Singer doesn't exactly believe in rights. He's a utilitarian. So when Singer uses rights, he uses it as shorthand for basic moral considerability. To say that a person has moral rights, if you're a Singerian, if you're Singer, just means that we need to consider that person. We have a moral obligation to consider that person's interest. But okay, let's move on. Humans are equal, but they're not equal. So what do we mean when we say that humans are equal? We surely can't mean they're equal in skill. That's just not true. Many humans are very different in skill than others. I play violin. I am not equal in skill to many violins out there. Many violinists out there. Humans do have a lot of variation in terms of their abilities in all different areas of life. So we don't want to take the view that racism, for example, is wrong because all races have an equality in terms of their ability. That's probably true when you're comparing general groups, but if that's the reason why racism is wrong, because generally group to group you can't differentiate between ability, then it doesn't tell us why racism is wrong on an individual level, because you can differentiate a person's ability person to person. So for instance here, is slavery wrong just because some slaves might be as smart as their masters? That can't be the case. Because that would mean that it's okay to enslave anyone with a low IQ. So we move away from racism, but then we endorse a sort of, I don't know, smartism? No, something's wrong with that also. So he writes here, Singer, it would be dangerous to rest the case against racism and sexism on the belief that all significant differences are environmental in origin. Singer wants us to accept not all individuals have equality in terms of what they're capable of, but they should have equality, this kind, in terms of whether or not they have rights, whether or not they deserve consideration. So how does he get that? So here's his basic arguments. Differences in intellectual ability are not grounds for a moral hierarchy. Alright, so he takes that as a premise. He's not really giving us an argument for that. That's one of the things he assumes, that you don't get to preference the life of Bill Gates over me just because Bill Gates is smarter. Bill Gates being smarter than me does not mean he's more morally valuable. So he takes that as his premise. Premise 2. The ability to feel pain does deserve moral consideration. Premise 3, animals feel pain. Conclusion, therefore, animals deserve moral consideration on par with that of humans, despite their lack of intellectual capacity. Okay, do we follow this? So animals feel pain just like I do. You shouldn't hurt me because I can feel pain, so you shouldn't hurt an animal because it can feel pain. The fact that I can go ahead and write a story tomorrow doesn't change the fact that it's right or wrong for you to cause me pain. It would be wrong to cause me pain even if I couldn't give a lecture on philosophy. It would be wrong to cause me pain just because it causes me pain, is his argument. Okay? I say here that Singer strengthens his argument by showing that we accept this logic when it comes to racism or sexism. When it comes to racism or sexism, we don't care about a person's intellectual ability. We don't care about what they can do. We think that it's simply the case that a person deserves respect and consideration regardless. So we don't ask, all right, but how smart are you? You got to tell me how smart you are before I give you consideration. So this similarity drives Singer to coin the term speciesism. So just like racism or sexism would be attributing moral value to the quality of one's race or sex, Singer, in an illegitimate way, Singer is going to define speciesism as attributing moral value to a being's species. And so far, anyway, we have not seen any good reason why that's an indicator of moral value. Okay? So I give you guys a question here. Can Singer's argument be used to secure moral consideration for trees? I'm not going to answer that. I want you to think about that. What do you think? Do you think trees, plants are morally valuable? If so, does this argument get us that? What do you think? Alright, let's move on. So, Singer gives us, one thing I do like about Singer is that he does reference experts. He references recent scientific research, and the general conclusion seems to be that yes, animals do feel pain in a way that is very similar to us. And notice how that argument goes. We share many of the same biological responses to stimuli that would be painful that animals do. If you give a shot to a chimpanzee, it will scream and cry. If you step on a cat's tail, it will scream at you and run away from you and maybe scratch you. That's what I would do too if you were stepping on me, right? I'd say, ow, get the heck off me, and I might hit you if you don't. We see, those are behavioral responses. Biological responses include things like increased heart rate, dilation of your pupil, sorry. And we share many of the same neural structures with animals that are associated with pain in humans. So this is kind of a looks like a duck, walks like a duck, is a duck argument. Animals look like they feel pain. They have the same or very similar neurological apparatus that we have when it comes to feeling pain, and they behave like they're in pain. So we have a good reason then for thinking they do feel pain. Now let me quickly harken back to before. Does that prove that animals feel pain? No, it doesn't. It doesn't prove animals experience the world in anything like we do. It's an inductive argument. It gives us a good reason for thinking there's a very good chance, a very good possibility that animals feel like we do. So much of a good possibility that it would be unreasonable to maintain significant doubt. Just like you have no way of knowing that I am a real person. I'm just a voice, right? How do you know that I'm a real experiencing person capable of feeling pain? Well, you might say, oh, I saw a video of you. Yeah, but that you don't know if that was really me. That could have been a computer-generated program. You have good evidence for believing that I'm a real person who feels pain, right? You don't need full-on proof for that. Just like we have good evidence for believing animals feel pain. We don't need full-on evidence for that. Okay, so what do we get from this? What is this argument? Where does it get us? Well, suppose we could run an experiment on a human or a cat. Now, it's against the law to run experiments on humans without anesthetic, right? Why? Because it's very painful, because it hurts. And it causes a similar amount of pain to the cat, we would imagine. So it's also wrong to do for the cat. So here are some basic formula that we would give. So I've defined these here as you take some action X. Maybe it's just slapping someone. X causes Y amount of pain to a human. What does it do to a cat? X causes Z amount of pain to that animal. To determine whether or not it would be wrong to do something to an animal but not a cat wrong to do to a human but not an animal depends entirely on how much pain they're experiencing. And if they experience any pain, then generally it's wrong to do. So when it comes to eating meat, for example, is a big one. We cause lots of pain, lots of suffering with factory farming. Would this be a moral thing to do for humans, to humans? Factory farming of humans, would that be immoral? I think so. And why? Well, because of the experience, because of the pain. Those reasons hold up for the animals as well, so it's wrong to do to the animals, is the basic argument here. Now, when you talk about this to a lot of people, what they end up saying is, yeah, but meat tastes so good, right? But it's so delicious. Well, let's imagine that human meat is the most delicious meat that ever did exist. And someone was telling you, well, you know, I grow humans out of my farm out back, and I slaughter them when they reach 18, and I eat their meat. Do you think that would be moral? and you give them some explanation. You know, these humans have lives to live. They can experience good things. You're causing them a lot of pain. Don't do it. And the person responds, yeah, but it tastes so good. Now, that's not a good argument. So, also, that's not a good argument in response to the case for animals. So, one last thing here. Here's a criticism of Singer. Does his argument give us a good reason for thinking that painless killing is wrong? Singer is cagey. He doesn't really give us a direct reason for thinking that it's wrong to kill an animal if you can do so without causing them pain, right? One thing that's worth considering then in your discussion groups, is it wrong to kill a human if you can do it without causing the human pain? Why? Why would it be wrong to do that? And would that reason have a hold up for animals too? So here's Singer's argument. It's wrong to kill humans. There must be some reason why it's wrong to kill humans, and that reason cannot be that it's wrong to kill humans just because they're human. That would be speciesist. Okay, do you follow on that? So you can't say it's wrong to kill a human because they're human. You have to give me an explanation of why being human involves something that makes it wrong to kill you. Okay? So whatever fact it is about humans that makes it wrong to kill them will also be true, at least to some extent, of animals. So if you just think that life is sacred, animals have life, you should think animal life is sacred. If you think that the ability to enjoy life is what makes it wrong to kill a human, animals also seem to, just like they can experience pain, there are things they like also. What if you say, but I want to say it's the ability to have a philosophical conversation that gives me, that makes humans, makes it wrong to kill a human but not an animal. Okay, but then we have to be careful that we're not also sinking back into just prejudice, because not all humans are capable of having a philosophical conversation. If you think raw intelligence is what matters, then you should be okay with us killing humans that don't have intelligence. Such humans might include babies, or toddlers, or people with mental development issues, right? Do you think it's okay to kill those people? I mean, if you say yes, at least you're being consistent. But the general position is no, you shouldn't kill any human without a good reason. Why? So it seems like whatever reason we give is also going to tell us that you shouldn't kill animals without a good reason. What qualifies as a good reason? Not sure yet, but it will have to be the same for both humans and animals. So if it's okay to kill animals because their meat tastes good, should be okay to kill humans for the same reason. If it's not okay to kill humans for that reason, it won't be okay to kill animals for that reason. Okay? So let's do our summary just real quick. So we saw a few things. We saw that moral equality does not depend on intellectual equality. We hold that to be the case in humans, so it's also the case with animals. Because pain is morally considerable, and animals experience pain. If there was a human and all they could experience was pleasure and pain, it would still be wrong to cause them pain, right? So it also ought to be wrong to cause animals pain. We saw that we cannot use one's species to justify harmful treatment. That would be speciesist. It would be just like saying, I am a male, and I think it's okay and I don't think it's okay to kill males, but I think it's okay to kill females. And someone said, why? Well, just because I'm male. That would be wrong, right? That would be terrible. And that is just like saying, I think it's okay to kill animals because they're not humans. So that's Singer's strong analogy between racism, sexism, and speciesism. And one last note, we're not talking about animals having political rights. Singer's not interested in that. That's other issues. So these are some remaining questions that are worth discussing. Which would be worse, if either, experimenting on a very intelligent human or experimenting on a brain-dead rat? So Singer still thinks, though, that humans in general are capable of experiencing a lot of pain, and maybe more pain than animals. It might be wrong to kill a human when if you could only kill if you could only save a human or a mouse, maybe you should save the human because the death of the mouse will involve less suffering, less people care about the mouse, so you should still save the human. Okay, that could be possible. Just be aware what that doesn't get us is you can kill a mouse whenever you want. Is painless killing wrong, though? Why? That's another interesting one for you guys to consider. Alright, let's move on to our very last one. This has been a long lecture. Not Miller, right here. Van Brugge and Vanderboer, basic income. Okay, so Van, I'm just going to refer to them as a V and V. V and V did a very nice job here as well of telling us exactly what they want to do in their opening lines. Their opening line is this: anyone committed to freedom will want to get all households out of poverty. Freedom from want is a precondition from freedom to court. So just from this line, just from this opening line, can you tell what their premises and conclusion are? I think we can, generally, and let's look at that here. 1, we want freedom to court. We think this is a good thing. To court here means simply, without any qualifications. We just want to be free. We think that's a good thing. And that kind of freedom requires freedom from want. What does want mean? Well, if I'm so hungry that I'm going to die if I don't get something to eat in the next day, then I'm not free to play the violin, I'm not free to pursue philosophy, because I'm stuck trying to just look after my food for the next day. Or if I'm sick and I need medicine, then I've got to find a job to pay for that medicine, and I'm not free to do something else that I may have wanted to be. So what do? So we want freedom, and that freedom requires freedom from want, and freedom from want requires the elimination of poverty. Conclusion is going to be we should want a universal basic income, because the universal, maybe I should have had a premise for, because the universal basic income is going to eliminate poverty and prevent want. Okay? So here's what I want you to do. Look at these premises. Is there anything here that strikes you as objectionable? Premise 1, 2, and 3, are they true? Does the logical inference look good? Does it make sense that if these 3 are true, that this one here is also going to be true? Can we infer the conclusion from these premises? Okay, what kind of argument is this? Is this inductive or deductive? I think this one is going to be deductive. It seems like this conclusion is trying to be reached at with certainty. It's being derived at via if-then statements. So this is A requires B requires C, right? Therefore, A requires C, and here we have that right here in universal basic income. All right, well, let's go ahead and look at it a bit more. So that's the basic argument, though, just real quick. And they don't spend too much time on this. They kind of take this more or less for granted, this argument. And instead, what they spend most of their article doing is defining their terms, giving us definitions, and giving us smaller arguments for why those definitions, those concepts are good ones. So in the case of basic income, here's what they describe it. They want it to happen on an individual basis, not a household basis. They want it to be roughly 1/4 of the GDP per capita. So the idea is, for the US, I just looked into this, 1/4 of GDP per capita is $1,170 per month. So that would mean they're arguing that all US citizens receive this amount of money per month, regardless of anything, really. This is not meant to be a substitute for publicly funded goods such as education or healthcare, and it is aimed at eliminating poverty. And we're going to see arguments for these 4 points. Okay. So, why should it be a cash income? Why not just provide people with the goods that they need? So here's the argument against cash, why cash is not a good idea. So they say cash incomes can be spent on items that do not alleviate poverty, luxury, drugs, etc. Goods can only be used for their intended purpose. So if we're trying to provide people freedom from want, and maybe that looks like hunger, why not just give people food? If you give people $400 a week to buy groceries, well, they might buy something other than groceries, right? And then the problem continues. So that's the general argument against, and we're going to look at that here. But here are the arguments for, right? Cash incomes require less bureaucracy. Cash incomes provide options for recipients to decide what they need in their life. So this is actually very libertarian, right? They're suggesting that what a person really needs or wants in their life is something that they're going to decide for themselves. So I suppose the idea would be, look, if someone really did spend their money on drugs instead of food, then what that person is deciding for their life is that drugs are more important than food. My guess is that people wouldn't keep making those decisions, or that perhaps they don't want to be making those decisions, and then we're not looking at a case of someone being like cheating the system. We're looking at a case of someone being so sick, mentally sick, that they're not able to make the rational decision to buy food, and in that case, perhaps what they should receive is health care. Drug treatment, for example. Well, that's me doing my best to make sense of this, to be a charitable reader. What do you guys think? The less bureaucracy is certainly easier. It's true, right? It would be easier to just send everyone a check with money rather than to try and arrange for, a package of rice and juice and all the foods and medicines that you're going to need specific to your individual needs and wants to arrange to arrive at your door. That's going to be pretty hard to do. It would be a lot easier to do with a cash income. So that's what I got from the argument there. Now, here's a question. Is this argument inductive or deductive? Seems to me this is an inductive argument. It doesn't seem like we got an argument that told us with 100% certainty that a cash income is better than a non-cash income, than a disposition of goods. Seems to me they were saying, look, there are some serious concerns with cash, but cash is just in general better. You weigh your options, pros and cons, cash comes out with more pros. So this seems like an inductive argument, and maybe with further research we might find that there's something else going on. But at least as the way things stand, seems like cash is the way to go. Individual or household income. So just a quick understanding of what we're looking at with an individual income. What that means is if you have two married persons that each of them receive their own individual check, instead of having the sum of money that they would both receive go to one person. And this is to prevent power dynamics within households. So if a husband, for example, receives $40,000 to take care of his family, and if the husband is abusive or keeps the money for himself, then the other members in that family are vulnerable and in a dangerous position. Yeah, they're not going to be able. Not only are they not going to be able to pursue their own goods, they're not going to be able to seek help because that requires money. If the wife needs to leave and pay for a hotel room, for example, she won't necessarily be able to because the husband has all the money. So again, this is an inductive argument. This is a good reason for thinking that likely individual income is better than household income. Further, households are frequently changing. This kind of brings us back to the bureaucracy issue. What qualifies as a household is not always clear. Say you've been living with someone for 5 months or 5 years. Are you a family? Are you not? If it's a household income, the government is going to have to come in and make that decision, and that could lead to unfair results. So it's just better, easier, if it's sent to an individual. Okay, very practical. So universal income. Why pay this income to everyone and not just the poor? So this is universal, right? This is not a like a welfare program which is aimed at those without money to support themselves. This is going to everyone, and here are their reasons. If we engage in a welfare system where we're paying money only to the poor, we encourage people to stay poor in order to keep receiving those benefits. So there are cases in which the money you make from your welfare will go away if you get a job, and the job that you have might pay less than those benefits, or it might be unstable and you might be thrown off the job and have to reapply for welfare. So then you have a system in which a person is encouraged to stay on welfare, right? And that's not good, because then you have a person who's not contributing to the economy, they're not producing anything, they're just taking money. Sure, we all agree that's not good. So give everyone a universal income, and then they won't be afraid to take a job, is the idea. You won't be afraid to try this new business idea. You won't be afraid to start working somewhere that maybe doesn't pay too much extra, because you're going to keep receiving your benefits. Paying to just the poor requires a test for those who are poor, and that test can often be inaccurate. So I thought this was interesting too. If your poverty level is determined just by the number of money, of dollars coming into your wallet every month, that may not reflect your actual poverty, your actual level of want, if you have hidden costs. For example, if I make $50,000 a year and if I'm single, well, that's pretty good, right? I'm not in poverty. I can do pretty much whatever I want. But if I have cancer and if I'm paying for $30,000, $40,000, treatments every year, then I am in poverty, and that may not be immediately apparent. So if we're going to pay to people who are just poor, then you're going to have to test for people who are poor. That can make mistakes, and what results then is that people don't get the level of assistance that their situation requires. Shares in quality. This is interesting because this was a little interesting move they made. It seems like there's some resentment on the behalf of people who have money that their money is being taken from them and given to the poor. V&V, Van Parijs and Vandervoort are suggesting that if the income is universal, that animosity goes away. Because I'm not giving up my money to pay the poor. I'm giving up my money to pay everyone, and that includes me. So if I'm making a lot of money, I'm essentially giving the government money and getting it back. Right? That sounds okay. I don't know. So one interesting thing about this article was that it was full of practical arguments. What we had here were practical inductive arguments. So they're suggesting that universal income, cash income, individual income, that these are on the whole better. So now what we're doing is we're weighing our pros and cons, just like we did with Emilio and Juanita. And coming at this argument is going to be a little different than coming at the other two arguments, which were deductive. This is inductive. So if you want to argue against it, then you may need to either give me a deductive argument that says, just look, the basic idea of a universal income is bad. And in that case, if you just don't like the idea of a universal basic income, then this is the argument you're going to want to respond to. But if there are specific issues that you don't like about it, like maybe it won't actually work, then you're going to deal with these inductive arguments. Okay? Alright, and the last one is it's unconditional. Unconditional meaning even if I don't try to work at all, I should still get the income. Why? Well, their idea here is that if it's conditional, then that means that you have to be looking for work, you have to be trying to find work in order to get the benefits that you need, and that this can force you into an unhealthy situation. Their example, you might not quit your abusive job because quitting, as opposed to getting fired, makes you ineligible for benefits. You may not realize this, but if you get fired, then there's some safety net for you, but if you quit, then it looks like you voluntarily quit and you're no longer looking for work, so you don't qualify for instance, unemployment benefits. So their suggestion is that an unconditional income is going to protect us from these sorts of situations, right? And this was a really neat thing that I just wanted to bring up. Unconditional income eliminates unsatisfying, low-paying jobs. So take a moment and think of the worst job you could ever have. I don't know, the least fulfilling. I don't know, maybe it's flipping burgers at a McDonald's all day for a minimum wage. Maybe it's doing data entry all day for a minimum wage. I did that for about 6 months after I graduated from my undergraduate. I sat at a computer and I just put numbers into a program all day, and it was awful. And it cost, and I was paid minimum wage for it. But I had to take a job because I had to make money, I had to eat. And I wouldn't have worked that job, though, if I didn't have to. And they're suggesting that those jobs, those unattractive jobs, will finally start paying the amount of money that would actually make it worth it. So how much money would it require you to spend all your day at an unsatisfying, unfulfilling job? Maybe $20,000 is not enough. Maybe $80,000 would be enough for you to stand at a fryer all day, flipping burgers. Well, I just thought that was really neat, this quote here. For the lack of strings attached, saying no to jobs that both pay little and are unattractive in themselves. Yes, those lousy, poorly paid jobs which you would not dream of doing will need to be paid better, perhaps even better than yours and ours, and this is good. So the idea is that maybe a professor makes $60,000 a year, that's a comfortable income, and it's a very fulfilling job, though. The professor's very happy, let's say. But someone working at McDonald's, let's say they're making $25,000 a year, so they're poor and they're unhappy because of their job is terrible. So what they're saying is that an unconditional income will make those unhappy jobs pay better. Those jobs won't exist anymore because they will pay better. The unhappy jobs won't exist anymore because since you're receiving more money, they become happy jobs. Okay, and this is our summary. Alright, so this has been quite the long one, and I'm going to leave it here. So don't forget to comment on your group forums, okay? These ones. Alright, y'all. Thank you very much.